Clap. Welcome, everybody, to our Purdue Extension Hot Topics for October of 2025. As always, we greatly appreciate your participation in this program. The whole goal of this is to expose or let people know of different specialists in the county. We have our YouTube page of past presentations. We've been doing this we were discussing almost 3 years now. So we've got about 36 videos. Uh, that you can watch about different specialists around the state. For those of you who are entering, we ask that everybody mute. And if you have a question, throw that in the chat box. My name is Jeff Shorgen with Wabash County Extension. We've got Matthias Engel from Howard County. Our speaker today is Fred Whitford. I used to call him Dr. Whitford back when I was in my master's program, but today he's Fred, or else he yells at me. So he is going to discuss the history of extension. He is sort of a jack of all trades. He works at the Purdue Pesticide Program that's located on the West Lafayette campus, but he travels everywhere. Fred, where are you right now?
Alabama.
He's in Alabama, so he goes all over the state and the country giving safety talks, talks for categories for different license holders. Really a wealth of knowledge. Lots of great publications that Fred has done and authored. So I'm not going to take any more of your time. And if Fred, you don't mind, the floor is yours. We'll
Okay, so Jeff, yep, there you are. You froze up for a second, but that's okay. So what we're going to talk about came about. I've been in extension now. I believe I'm starting my 35th or 36th year. It's been a long time. Obviously bald and white beard like Santa Claus, but um, when I came to Purdue, I had only had limited extension experience. And I was asking, what is it about extension? What is extension? What is Purdue Extension? And then what I found out is there was nothing written on it. And so that became my point of research. Part of my research was to write and to try to document what took place. And so we have written 8 books now. I think I'm working on my eighth or my ninth book. I should know this. Um, and so you'll see those at the very end. And so what I want to show you is various pictures from these books and to try to put the setting of what it was like for extension back in the days. You start looking at extension around 1912 and, we slowly built it up. But what I want to do is focus on the people that lived on these communities. And so you can see here, no roads, it was all dirt. I mean, it was really, you couldn't travel from one location to the next. Everybody was isolated. In the early days, there were no electricity. Electricity didn't come into play to the 30s and 40s in many of our rural communities. The towns had it, but they didn't go out into the country because it was too expensive and too few people were going to use it. And so there's no electricity. If you're on an REMC like I am, that's where they came out of this need for electricity. No indoor water, manual labor, as you'll see, and about 20 cents an hour is what you made. All right. So we'll start with this. You know you're in Indiana when the pig makes the family photograph. And this is really a beautiful picture. Should have made the cover of one of the books, but it's a little bit out of focus. But you can see here poverty. It was an extremely poor place to live in rural Indiana, and nothing was wasted. My wife was telling me when she went to school, she wore these kind of clothes as well in Louisiana, where we're both from. And you can see the feed sacks, cotton sacks, and all of that. But these clothes were hand me downs and then hand me downs, and we still practice that. My grandson's 11. Somebody had twins, and he's got all of his clothes 2 for 1 coming, and we reuse them. So we still do a lot of that recycling. So let's see if I can make this one. Yeah, we'll do it this way. This is what it kind of looked like. And this is 1927. And I don't know if anybody that's either on this live shot or will watch it later when it's taped. Um, if they know the Bextold family, to let them know that we've got a picture of their family here around a stove. And this looks like a fairly well-to-do home. And if many of you have looked at homes in past years to buy, you'll notice that a lot of the older homes had this sort of design to them. All right, come on, what's wrong, Fred? Let's try that.
It usually has a little bit of a delay, Fred. No worries.
I thought that was me. Okay, I got it. Very
I
good.
mean, it could be user error. I'm going to give you a hard time. I can't not.
It probably is user error. And so as you know, if you think about your grandmas, grandpas, your great grandparents, they did everything themselves. And so you raised your own animals, you processed your own meat as they're doing these. And in fact, nowadays these are antique kinds of things, right? We have one at our house as well. If you wanted to get cream, separate cream from milk, this is how it was done. And you can see one's lighter, one's heavier, and everybody did their own stuff. Everybody worked. You can see here the kids are in the pictures. Here they're going to be making, I assume, apple cider. You can see them peeling on your right. You can see the stove, the pot boiling the stuff. So everybody had a hand on the farm because at that time you couldn't go to town. You may not have had the money. So unlike today, which is primarily it's a hobby, it was very, very important for these people because during the winter they're not going to have anything to eat except for what they actually canned and preserved. And so during this time, Extension did a lot of canning program, preservation programs, so that people would know how to best can their products so they would have food to eat. And I'll also mention, and Jeff also brought it up. If you've got questions as we go, just bring it up, and I'm more than happy to try to answer the questions. And even all I have is J.P. King in Wabash. Um, Even building barns. At the time, the wood came off of the farm. And so if you could grow and do your own stuff, this is what we did. So this barn, 1925, it might still exist, that on the King farm, and it all came from from their own woods. And then if you couldn't, there were certain things you just did not produce. And so you had these guys like you can see here, Chase Rogers Cash Store. It's funny now, we go to most places, they don't even take cash anymore. You got to have a credit card. And so he would bring the stuff to you, and you can see here that this family is buying what products that they need to purchase in order to take care of their business at home. And you can see here that the old hen is getting weighed here. I'm assuming that it's going to them as well. And again, some of you may know this in North Manchester. Apparently, there was a store, Basher Feed Store, and this one I'm not familiar with. But you can see this is what it looked like when you went into for poultry or for which is pretty cool because right back here, if you notice up on by that sign that says fly spray, we've got DDT that we're selling there at this particular area. And then some of these were dusters that we would dust with. There they are on the bottom. So you would go to your feed store to purchase things that you would need. One of the more important things that we today don't, that we just assume we have electricity. In fact, I was talking to a guy that took me here to this conference talking about power, and we were talking about that people just don't appreciate electricity. We're to the point now we're almost out of our ability to produce enough electricity. We don't have the lines or the generators, and every time we keep adding more businesses, we're reaching the peak where you'll be seeing rolling blackouts unless we do something to be able to generate the power. But back then they didn't have the power. And when you talk to people, it's pretty interesting. They will tell you 1930, 1940s that they were able to get electricity. And the way that it worked was the REMC was created in a county. So, Jeff, in your county, do you have an REMC?
We sure do.
And what's it called?
Heartland.
Heartland. And how about you, Matthias? Do you have one in your county?
The county I live in does, and it's Miami Cass REMC.
Yeah. And so they were created when extension was greatly involved with that. And they had to go do surveys and figure out how many miles of line and poles and generation they would need. An extension role was to go out and try to convince people who didn't want to spend more money that electricity would actually save them money. So extension held drive after drive to get people to sign up and to commit to buying electric power. And if they could get so many people to basically sign a contract, then Washington, D.C. would loan the county, the REMC money, and then it had to be paid back over time. So that's how all these REMCs got started. But before that, you read by a lamp. Now, the beauty of this is many different ways you could talk about electricity. One is it extended the day's work so that a farmer could extend their day by having power and light to do their work. So if you worked the fields and something broke, maybe you could fix it that night to be ready for the next day. And it also, electricity brought in different kinds of power tools to speed up stuff. uh, to the women in the house. And I don't know, this seems to be in North Manchester. Hartsile seems to me would be a very unusual name in a sense that it's not a Smith or a Jones, but there ought to be family members of here. And here she is, Mrs. I assume William W. With her electric washing machine. Now, I don't know about you folks, but man, that still looks like the old one, that the old crank kind that you had to do. And I remember my grandma having that. Electricity brought the ability to store food in a refrigerator instead of an ice box. And so now that daily chore of providing a meal for the family, 3 meals, was made a little easier because I could now store stuff. Extremely important for nutrition. And then the one thing that it brought to me that I always never thought about, most of our rural communities were not part of the system. They didn't have electricity, and without electricity, you didn't have these appliances, and specifically the radio. And the radio allowed us to listen to the world events and to participate, which was something that we had not been able to do before. And it's kind of funny because I remember in my grandmother's house, the TV only stayed on so many hours a day and then it went out. When we bought our first TV, we had black and white, and then we bought a color TV. And for those of you that's a little bit older, you remember buying your TVs and radios and stuff more for the cabinet than the gadget that you were buying it for. That it was so important. And now we have flat screen TVs. We don't even worry about the cabinets, but this was extremely important. An extension would be able to reach this man, the woman, because we would have programs that you would listen to over the radio. And then you would do this over a number of weeks. And then after that, you would have to answer questions like a test to get a certificate. So Extension was able to reach people in the furthest communities because of the radio. As we said, everybody had work to do. This little boy here is probably bringing whiskey out to the hands working in the fields. If you've ever been around these draft animals, and I have, and I love that the animal power, it's just amazing how huge these animals are. Luckily, most of them are timid, or at least they've been worked to where they know what to expect. Now, if you think about extension in any generation, it's the same thing. The daddy on the right teaching the boys on the left. And so, not always, but most of the adults don't like change. I don't like change. I get up at the same time. I use the same toothbrush. I do everything the same. But in especially in agriculture, we're always changing and trying to introduce new things that are around or to correct mistakes that we have made over time based on research. And so what we tried to do is to reach the daddy, but also the kids. And that's, you'll see at the end, we had dairy clubs, corn clubs, we had clubs for everything because then we were able to teach the kids directly about the latest science. And kids today are the same way. They listen, they don't have any preconceived ideas, which is why the 4-H program is so important in our communities in reaching these kids and bringing them some of the latest science. You went to school, and I thought this was a great picture. You entered the back of the school bus. That's would make its round in the country if you were lucky enough to have a school bus. Rats were all over the place. And so Extension for decades would have a national rat day or state rat day. The governor would proclaim it's rat day, and you would come to our extension office where you would buy the rat bait, or not buy it, we would give it to you. And you can see right down here, the guy's got a gun, but I mean, somebody went to a lot of trouble to make this rat collection and mouse collection. Look at it, how it's just perfect there. And this old boy down here on the right hand side, he looks awful happy, like he's done something. But the importance here, not that a rat is a dead rat, but that rat would cost a farmer $2 each rat. Now you think about it, these rats, you're only going to collect a handful of them that you can find. So no telling how many rats that they were able to actually remove from the farm.
I propose a motion that we talk to the governor and instead of rats, you do invasive species like honeysuckle or tree of heaven or even spotted lanternfly now that's spreading.
Jeff, you cut out on me. You'll have to repeat it if you would.
I apologize.
That's fine.
Uh, if we did instead of rats, do invasive species.
It's the same thing. So whether it's Bradford pear, whether it's Canada thistle, we have a lot of native plants that are invasive. You think of vinca, you could replace this in today's world with garlic mustard, and the list goes on and on. Emerald ash borer, most of the people in the room, if you had ash trees, they're all dead. We've lost all of our ash trees. I still have one left. I would probably pay to have it cut down, but it's so close to the house. I've been treating it, but you're right. You can replace those pictures with today, nothing changes. So, if you're a master gardener, we ask you to take a soil sample, and I'm not sure how many people do that, but back in the day, we had to work with farmers, and we had to teach them to understand the pH of the soil, how acid, how a lot of us would say how sweet or how sour the soil is. And so we had to teach these farmers that. And you can always tell the extension agent back in the days, they all dressed up in suit and tie, no matter what the case is, as we go through this. And so if you wanted lime, which was a bulk commodity then and still used today, still a major component, though it's just lime, but back then it was new science. You would have to go, you would order it as a group. Extension oftentimes took the orders, and we would then contact the suppliers, and it was delivered on rail, and then you had to show up that day to pick them up. Now, I've never measured it, so I'm going to, just to make things easy, that one wagon is enough, holds about 2 ton of lime. and probably that would be a good number for Indiana. Our farmers apply about 2, sometimes more, but 2 tons an acre over a number of years. And so you think about this guy, if he had 90 acres, he would have to make 90 trips over roads that were poor and have to be able. And so it was, as you can see, unless you live close by, this was, you couldn't do this. And so here is another one, rail cars, and you can see the people lined up with all of their workers, everybody pitching in to try to get these things unloaded, because if not, they would have to pay a penalty for that car not moving. And not only did you have to handle it from the train onto the wagon, but then you had to unload it on your farm like he's doing here, and then you'd have to reshovel it back into your spreader. So that's what this guy here is doing. The reason we did that was because livestock was so important to the farm, not only for meat, for milk, whether it's hogs, dairy, beef cows, chickens, that a lot of this stuff relied on alfalfa. And alfalfa is still a what they call the queen of the forages. It's a high value. We have farmers today that will raise alfalfa and sell it specifically to dairies and or to horse people who have horses, and some of them are very expensive horses. But that required, in order to get that, required the soil to be at a higher pH than what we had. So if you couldn't lime, you couldn't do that. But you can see here how they're working it off the small wagon, being pulled by the horses, loaded up onto a big stack. Now, this probably won't show up really well there, but this is soybeans. And what's been lost in time was soybeans was actually brought into Indiana because it could grow in the pH of our soils, but more importantly, it was a forage, just like alfalfa. And so it was a hay crop, not an oil crop like we have today, but it would eventually go through an oil and the rest of it. But initially, it was a hay crop. And what I love about this picture is the ingenuity of people who work in rural areas. And so you can see here they're shredding, they're trying to take the beans off the plants. And so they're trying to run it through something so it makes the pods break apart and the seeds come out. And you can see right here how they're getting their power to run this piece of equipment is off the car. And if you see right there off the car, they're running it off the wheels. And that's the power to do that. Now, when I do this live, I always like these shots because I ask people, are seeds on our, as you're seeing there, on corn, corn on the cob, are the seeds alive? And there's a lot of people said, no, those seeds aren't alive. Well, then how do we plant more corn if we don't have seeds? And so it is a something that's alive. So back in this day, we didn't have hybrid corn like today. We grew our own corn, and people stored their corn on their own farm. And what the researchers at Purdue found, and this again brings up the point of research supporting our recommendations and our experiences. All right. So we use our experiences and the research to try to help people. So we said the research showed that 30% of the corn that was planted was already dead or diseased before they planted it. And so if we could change that, we could alter how much yield people were getting. And so the way we did this, and many of you have done this in high school or elementary or middle school, where you take seeds and you wet them and then you germinate the seeds and then you look at them. Well, we took that a step further here. This was called the ragdoll, and we took the ragdoll in every corn, ear of corn, they would take out, you can see 6 seeds. And those 6 seeds were linked to that corn. And if you noticed up here, we have numbers. Every ear was numbered. So you would bring your ears of corn to us, and we would actually grow them out for you. And this is what it looked like. And so what we would do was to tell you that your seed, that ear of corn is either bad or it's good for seed. So the seed that was bad went to the hogs, or the ears, and the ears that had 100% germ and no disease went to for your planting. And that was a major advancement in corn production. Then we started asking people, instead of picking it amongst thousands of ears, when you're in the field, pick them. And so what we were teaching people was this: you looked at the ear. If the corn was at a level that you could pick it with your hand, that's a good stand. That's a good stalk. If the ear was 10 feet high, don't pick that one. If it was too low, don't pick it. And so then you would look at diseases on it. You would look at stalk strength. So what these guys were doing was basically doing genetic breeding on their own corn, if that makes sense. Well, then they had to be stored, because if an ear of corn, if the kernels are there and there's still a little water in them, if they freeze, they die. So we had to show people how to store them, like you're seeing here. Let me back up just a little, see if I can. Yeah, we had to show them how to store them so that the air would go through them, and keep them dry. And in fact, if you think about it, Jeff, we often talk about some of our fruit trees, trimming or pruning out the trees, some of the limbs, to allow airflow, right, as a way of controlling some diseases. Now, folks, a lot of people want to go back to the good old days. If you think about this man with 12-inch plow, 12 inches, you know how many miles I'm going to walk before I even do 1 acre? 12 inches up and down, up and down. And this is how it worked. We didn't have as many cattle here, being, or oxen being, doing our work. What we generally had early on was horses. And you also understand that a horse, a team of horses, much like the Amish do. When I work with the Amish, we still do this kind of agriculture, but they have large teams of horses, because the more I got to do work and like plow through the dirt, the bigger that I'm trying to be. Instead of 12, maybe I want to be 3 feet, requires a lot more horsepower. And so you start seeing farmers doing this. And you can see what he's got. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that 8? I see the butt of one. I can't, let's see, is that 1, 2? I've got 4 in the front. I think I've got 3 in the back. And so we had to teach farmers, how do you tie these workhorses, these draft horses, how do you tie them together so that you can achieve the power you need? And you can see on the back end, he's basically got some, it's basically like a rake. He's sort of raking over it. Then we went to tractors, and this is my newest book that I'm working on. I'll show you at the end, but we went from horses to tractors. And if you notice, this tractor is a Farmall, a very famous set line of tractors that controlled the market for a long time. But you notice on this one, there's no rubber wheels. And you also notice in the front that the wheels are like tricycle wheels. They're real close. So these were tricycle tractors. And this was a huge advancement, because he could plant 4 rows of corn at one time instead of 1 row or 2 rows. And I don't know, Matthias, how many rows we can plant today? Do you have a sense of that?
It depends on the planter, if they're planting corns or beans, but generally for corn, 24 rows is a pretty good number, 16, 24.
I was going to go with
Or
16, but I've lost. But now they're up to
Yeah.
24 rows. So that takes a lot of power, and you couldn't do that with horses because I've got acres that I have to cover. So, the advancement is pretty remarkable. This is what the hogs look like. Man, these are big hogs. These are hogs you could actually ride to town if you wanted to. But back then, it was a different type of meat that people wanted as compared today with more of the lean meat that we're asking. And if you think about it, going from what we call a fat hog to a lean hog required a lot of science. And Matthias, I think you were in animal science. And so what we feed these animals is critically important on making sure that they gain an appropriate amount of weight per day, but also that we able to get this lean meat, right?
Yep, that is correct.
And that lean meat requires me to understand the genetics of the animal. And so now the big push has been is how do I reduce some of the manure that these animals produce, because we're concerned about manure in the environment and all of that. And so there's researchers that are tackling that front of hogs. So this is how the hogs were in pastures. And there are people now that are willing to pay for hogs that are grown on pasture. And it's nice to have, and we do that, and we can do it. The problem is when you put them on pastures now, you start looking at parasites, specifically worms. And back in this day, that we were just now developing some of the medications to kill the worms. And let's see one here. And so we had to convince farmers that it was worthwhile to do this, to do these control on the worms. And so this is a Purdue veterinarian extension. And what he's doing, he said, farmers, bring me your runt pigs. And you see a lot of these demonstrations, they already knew what the answers were going to be. They already knew the answers. So the farmers would bring their runt pigs, and what they found out when they opened them up, that these pigs were just a mass of boiling worms, and that the worms were eating all the nutrients, and that's what made this pig a runt. And so getting these pigs either vaccinated or with pills and whatever was an extremely important movement toward making sure our livestock was healthy to start with. And so this is Ogden Farm, and what he's doing here is vaccinating a pig. And again, I'm not sure Ogden, if that is still a family there, but if you recognize the name, let them know it, and I'll be glad to share the pictures with them. Poultry. We always say, Laura was, poultry was the woman's job on the farm. And that was true until some of the depressions. And during the depressions, and I guess let me point this little guy up here. See him on the roof watching? I wish this one was also would have been better focused, because I would have used this one on a cover. I love this one. And obviously, can you tell who the extension agent is? We call them educators, but back then there were agents. There he is with his suit and tie. And folks, I used to raise chickens. If you ever worked with chickens, you understand that chicken does one thing and she does it very well, and that they poop and they produce a lot of manure. And you can hold them and they'll be doing it. So I'm always amazed at these guys. But what the problem was this: most of that, we had about 100 hens, and as it turns out, during some of the poor times, depressions and stuff, it was these chickens and selling eggs into New York that saved these farms. If it had been for chickens, many of these family farms would have gone out of the family. So the question we asked, and we already knew the answer, again, that's the research base. We knew that in 100 hens, there was a number of birds that were not laying eggs. All they were doing was eating. Now, these are not city chickens. These chickens here have got to work, and everybody has to produce something for the money I'm spending on them. And I just love it when I meet these guys. Sometimes they're in their 80s and 90s, or the women, 80 or 90 years old. We knew that if you measured where the egg came out of and she was a three-fingered bird, then she was laying eggs. And we knew that if she was a one-fingered bird, she was not laying eggs where they come out. And you would have these older folks telling us that that was a huge step toward production and efficiency. And so, well, we would teach people here how to look at the birds, and then they were to go into their own flocks and do the same thing. And if it was a one-fingered bird, she went to the pot. You ate her. Now, farmers, being farmers, legitimately so, should have said, how do you know this? You proved to me because these birds look healthy. So it was pretty simple. Again, research was already done. They put the one-fingered birds into the pen, usually with the two-fingered birds, and they get a few eggs. And then they would put the three-fingered birds in another pen, and they would feed them and water and care for them the same way. And we already knew that the three-fingered birds were laying the eggs, and it was to your best interest to go and find those one and two-fingered birds and get rid of them and bring in birds that could lay. Today, that seems rather elementary. It seems rather simple, but for this period in time, it was very effective because here is eggs are being sorted, they're being cleaned, and a lot of these eggs would go on rail cars, and they would go to places like New York and other places where they were willing to pay a premium price. This is what your dairy looked like. Uh, you know, we often look at these pictures and wonder, how did people live to be 90 and 100 then? But they did, and they did very well. And we would do the same thing with the dairy. Is the animal giving me milk? Is what she is producing, is it more than what it's costing me to feed her and the labor and all of that? And so this was the same deal. Extension off campus would hire a milk tester. We would get 20 or 25 dairies together. They would help pay for the cost of this man or woman, and then they would basically single out the animals that were not producing enough to support them on the farm. It was a day before we knew about genetics, and now this genetics of animals. Matthias, and I'll come back to you. I don't know how far back we go, but now we can trace based on the bull's offspring to his daughters, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
And our farmers today can have records to make sure that this bull can produce daughters that are high yielding milkers, and I should say percent cream. Is that correct?
Yes, that is. They call those expected breeding values or EBVs.
Yep. So we have the numbers to support that. Back then, it was just starting. And back then, we actually bred the bull to the cow. And today, Matthias, for many of our livestock, we don't breed them like that anymore. Is that right?
For a commercial standpoint, they try to still breed that way. Now, if you're talking show industry, absolutely not. They're going for looks.
Okay. So again, this was all new stuff. Many times in extension, we didn't know the reasons why. We just knew that it happened. And this is a sign in South Bend of Albert Falk. You know, he was very proud of his milk. And again, he's promoting it. Milk was extremely important. This is how we delivered the milk. You see these milk cans today on antique stores. Many of you have these as part of your own collection at home. I collect milk bottles. I got a handful of those. But here is another way that it actually came then to town. And you know, you'd have to be up in years to remember this. But again, we would deliver the bottles to the house and then pick them back up. All right. World War II was just absolutely fascinating of what extension did. So people like Jeff and Matthias would be I'm gonna say forced, that's not the right answer. They would be given charge of all kinds of things. And one of them was we needed metal. Back in this time, everything was recycled. The military during World War II got everything. They got all the rubber, they got all the scrap. In fact, if in probably in Wabash County or where Matthias is, you made cars and trucks. Maybe there was 15 sets of tires you could buy for the whole year for everybody in the community because the military was needing it not only for our military, but helping the military that supported us across the ocean. And so there was these extension drives, which was critical in coming up with the metal. Unfortunately, when I work with the antique tractors, they also appreciate the fact that a lot of our tractors went this way, got recycled for in this fashion, which meant they were no longer available to fix. The ladies back in this time were responsible for driving the tractors. Here you can see this one's got rubber tires on the back, got rubbers on the front, and you can also see that little tricycle, as it wasn't four wide, that allowed her to work in the rows. This is what it looked like as all this metal came in. The rubber tires, again, coming off the farms, junkers laying around, all of this was just scrap, which was really great. And even fat was important, that people in the homes would save their fat because when you saved it, you could take the fat in. These folks here would, behind the counter, would take it, and then it would go, my understanding is to make munitions. All right, so everybody was involved in this recycling effort. And probably one of the greatest stories ever, and I still meet these people because they're in their 80s normally. When the Japanese took over all of that part of Asia, they also had control of a plant, and it was called a kapak, if I'm pronouncing it right. And that kapak had a fiber, and that fiber went into the life vest that the sailors used, the pilots used, and all of that. And so we needed a million, and we needed a million life vests. And so we no longer had that plant. And it was a Russian immigrant that lived in Chicago, and he had studied these plant. And in person, always a handful of people can figure out what this plant is. If you're on the farm side, it's called a major weed. If you're on the environmental side, it's called monarch butterfly for the larvae to feed on. And so this particular plant, and Jeff, do you know what it is?
Milkweed?
Milkweed. And if you've ever opened up a milkweed plant, you'll have those fibers and the seeds. And so they had figured out a way in Michigan. They had a plant, and all of this went to Michigan on rail cars. They had a way of actually opening it, pulling that seed off, and getting the fiber. And so the reason this was important with these kids, all the men were at war. If they wasn't, they were in the factories making materials for war. The women were working on the farm and or in the factory. They were managing the farm, as you saw that one woman. So the only labor we had was the kids. And so Extension would work with the county educational directors, the superintendents, and we would actually let these kids out of school. And we had milkweed patches picked out, and so this showing the kids picking out bushels and bushels of milkweeds. And because of these kids, we'll never know how many, but these kids would have saved probably thousands of lives because we were losing a lot of ships and planes, as you suspect, during World War II. Now, this is what the kids did. They would pack them in these onion sacks so they could dry. and then they would be shipped on rails, another set of kids. And you can see what they picked off their farms or their locations around. The kids were paid, I can't remember if it was a nickel a bag, let's just say a nickel a bag. But then that most of them would either buy war bonds with them or would give them to the local community to do things for the war. So it's just a great story that we have in one of the books about that. And it's just it's what do you call it? It's remarkable when I meet these men and women, and they're, again, they're up in their 80s and 90s, and they go back and they can recall when they were the little kids and they were doing it. Just kind of heartfelt. And the last piece on education, it wasn't all about ag. I mean, you saw some canning stuff and things, but the farm was an extremely dangerous place to work. Uh, the home ec ladies, the home ec clubs were huge. These were powerful clubs that worked the Indiana General Assembly fairly well. And so, what we had to teach the women who became doctors on their farms was how to treat people like with TB, broken legs, colds, you name it, because we had trouble going from one place to the other because of the roads, and we had limited number of doctors. So it was the women who became important. And I don't know if we have anybody online that's part of these. Today, we still have home ec clubs. I still call them the home ec ladies, and they always laugh about it. But what we would do is we couldn't get all the women. So what we would do is take a club, we would get one or two leaders. We may have 7 or 8, 10 clubs per county. Jeff or Matthias, do you know how many clubs we have today in your counties?
I think there's 4 or 5 in Howard County.
Yep. And that's going to be huge. Jeff, any guess on your part?
We used to have one. I don't think it's active anymore, but I do know there's a fairly, well, the only ones I can think of that's nearest is Grant County. They've got a pretty nice club.
But as you know, this became less important for many different reasons, though would disagree with a lot of it because it's coming back. So we would show these ladies how to sew. We would show them how to reuse articles. We would show them how to can. We would show them how to do all kinds of stuff, as you can see here. And then these ladies would have to go back to their clubs and they would teach their members this lesson. And the Purdue ladies would come out and would keep bringing them up to the next set of lessons. So it's kind of like a train the trainer type of program. And you think about it today, very few people can sew, including me. We know very little about food nutrition. And so, how do we cook properly? How do we can? All those things that we deemed not really important seem to be coming back now. And this is why that part of extension is still extremely important in dealing with the public. And one another great story as we get near the end here.
Hey,
We
Fred.
educational, yes.
Hey, I just wanted to shamelessly plug, you had mentioned the canning and the gardening and all that. One of our programs that we have done, this is our second year, and everyone on the call should have gotten information on the email. We have a homesteading conference up in Noble County, Indiana now. It's called Rooted and Resilient. Last year, we had people butchering chickens, we had people canning, gardening. So there's definitely a needs assessment that has given us plenty of um, motivation to bring back what we already know people have done in the past
You betcha.
safely.
Again, it's just was deemed not important. Now it is, and we have all of that. And Jeff, that's all based also on science, on nutrition, on what's in a food, what's not in a food, and calories, and all of that stuff is all science based. It's not made up stuff. How do we can something so that we don't end up with some sort of a bacterial problem, right? I mean, uh, so at one time, Purdue was very, very small. And so we had researchers who could not get their research out to tell people. So we hired Extension, and our first Extension director created what were called corn cars, rail cars. And then it would become, like you're seeing here, the agriculture exhibit car. And you can see on this one what they're going to talk on. And so they would take these cars out to these stations. They would park there, and then people would come there by the thousands to hear the latest on corn production, how electricity. We had one on electricity. We had one on soybeans. uh, Roughly 40 years worth. And here we are sampling people's soil to help them understand a soil sample, what they have. And that soil sample today is again critically important in making sure that we put out only what we need and not more. Because right now it looks like we're fixing to hit a depression in the ag market. And we're in one right now where they're going to be losing money on every acre they harvest. And so they're looking at these soil samples with maybe a different eyeball toward those. Here, this guy is showing on this train when if you can see the barrel right here, we were trying to get people to do their own testing. And so what he's showing to them is how to read your corn seed and how to look for diseases and how to get a percentage germination. This is what it looked like inside the rail car. You had a speaker in the front, and I think he was talking about corn borer, which was an exotic invasive pest that came in and just wiped the field. It broke the stalks, and all the stalks would lay down, and you could almost never pick the fields when they were really bad. So that was the idea. And again, our livestock was also important. And so we would bring these animals there. Sometimes we had raffle tickets and we gave away calves. But in this case, we would talk about the animal and whether it was upkeep or breeding or care or whatever. This was part of the train. And I can't see in the back what that one, I should have looked that one up, what that was. And we come to your high schools. And this is funny because can you imagine today going to your high school and I'm going to bring these big old animals in here in front of the basketball goal. And what I want you to see is where the people are sitting. First of all, you couldn't get into a school. And then B, we would have to sign 40 pieces of paper in case somebody got injured. But back then it was a different time. We loved show and tell. And that's something that I still try to do today as much as I can. This is why we have field days across our Purdue farms. We have them all over. I can't remember. We have 7 or 8 if you count our agronomy farm and hort farms and stuff. But what we'd like to do is show and tell because we know what the results are going to be. But if people can see it, they're more apt to adapt some new technology or some new practice. Let me move this out of my way. And so a lot of it was competition. We still like competition. So Wilbur Thomas is this guy right here holding the trophy. Again, he's got a Belgian colt, and this is a draft horse, a workhorse, and this is 1928. Again, Wilbur Thomas. And I thought I would end with this, give you a couple pieces of paper here, but 4-H is still important. It's not the only program we do. Obviously, it's the one that's the most recognized across the counties. 4-H has always been strong, and is still strong. It's still doing very well. So, that 4-H has changed a lot, as you know, but back then we have all these clubs and the kids would learn how to do things by the method of the day, not what their mothers and fathers had been taught. And so that's how we were able to advance these kids because all of them went into farming or they married a farmer. So they're all gonna be farmers. And so it was a way of increasing awareness of the latest science. So some of the books, make sure, yep, we're okay. Some of the books that we've got out, here is one that the extension educators, I pulled from their reports. This is J.C. Allen, who was a famous agriculture photographer from Purdue. We've used his collection. This is our newest one. It's being edited now. It's going from horses to tractors and what that meant. And it's an amazing story that I knew nothing about. So I'm going to leave this up, this part, and Jeff, they can come to you or Matthias, but these are some of the books that we have that you can get. The tractor one's not done. There's one that's missing here. I guess I'm pointing out you can get 30% off. I don't make any money off of this. It all goes back to Purdue. I make not a single penny. So if you're interested in the books, go to Purdue Press, look up my last name, and those books will appear. But I can also send you this email if you want 30% off, which I always want 30% off on it. So with that, Jeff, we still got a few minutes if it's okay. If there's any, I hope people enjoyed looking back in time because history is important. And the older we get, it seems like it's more important to us than anything. So,
No,
so
we appreciate it. Yeah, I always cut you off. I'm sorry, Fred.
that's okay.
I no, really appreciate you undertaking the history of it all. As extension changes, I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe we need to write a grant and get some educators on a bus and start going around to people and having tours again. And the research is a little bit different than doing germination tests with cornfields, but there's a lot of stuff out there that I was writing down the different topics we cover now. It's not corn and soybeans because those farmers have a lot of resources with their sales folk, but we do a lot of stuff that's up and coming. Tar patch wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, you think of short corn, the work
Yeah.
that's been done on short corn instead of this tall corn. We're right there on the edge. You think of an ag engineering, some of the equipment work that those men and women are doing. Yeah, so a lot of us, what we hope happens, Jeff, is that what we do becomes part of the fabric, and so that if we can get the people who do seed, the people who do equipment, the people who sell livestock, if we can get them doing that messaging for us, which is what they're doing based on the research, then that allows us then to do other things to promote the things that are up and coming with show and tell. Yes,
Which I'm gonna do another shameless plug, because I did turf grass for my graduate resources, and I presented my research to the industry. Year later, a guy came back and shook my hand and said, "You saved me time and money because my herbicides worked better because I didn't have a problem with my water quality."
and right. And sometimes if the master gardeners are on here, they would also appreciate the fact that the master gardeners is probably not saving money and time. What we're interested in is how to produce good fruit, vegetables, and all that, right? And of which a lot of that goes to the food pantries. So it's this ability for a man or woman or kids to grow their own food and the pride that they get out of it. That I grew this. And you hear that, I grew this, like it's just a major accomplishment, and it is. So sometimes it's about production, profitability. Sometimes it's about doing things that's better for the environment. Other times is for self-satisfaction. Yes.
And I'll say another one. Yesterday, I was at the public library, and we I brought in popcorn that was grown in a field here in Indiana, and I had the kids shuck the corn, which they thought that was the weirdest thing, and then we popped it right there. They all thought of microwave popcorn. I was like, nope, this is how it's actually grown, and we can do it here. What is it? One of my initiatives is, where does your food come from? The grocery store. No, it comes from your soil.
Yeah, yeah. But it's linking things back. So let me just say thank you for all of those that were online here. I don't know, we had maybe 20. I'd really appreciate it's going to be tape, but I do appreciate you taking an hour of your time to listen to this story. It may not help you at all. It won't help you at all during the rest of your day, but maybe it gives you an appreciation of the extension tying into research and being out there with the people, helping them eyeball to eyeball. And I think that's what I wanted to get across. And we still do that today, and it's just as important today as it was then, though it's different technologies, right? It's different, but it's the same idea. So
Awesome. Thank you, Fred. We will get you guys a follow-up email. I'm going to stop recording. And Fred, thanks